Welcome to Writing Marginalia, a place for creative conversations. My name is Brianna Szymanski. I am your host. Today we are joined by Leta McCollough Seletsky, the director of the Low-Residency Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing program at the University of Nevada, Reno at Lake Tahoe, a National Endowment for the Arts 2022 Creative Writing Fellow. She is the author of The Kneeling Man, My Father's Life as a Black Spy Who Witnessed the Assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., a Library Journal Best Book of 2023, BookPage Best Book of 2023, Black Caucus of the American Library Association Honor Book for Nonfiction, and finalist for the Zora, Neale, Hurston, Richard Wright Foundation 2024 Legacy Award for Memoir Nonfiction. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, and elsewhere. She holds a BA from Northwestern University and a JD from the George Washington University Law School. I'm very pleased to introduce you to Leta. Welcome, Leta.
Thank you for having me.
I just finished reading The Kneeling Man. It's not only the story of your father, it's also your story, unpacking family history, revisiting Memphis in the late 1960s, offering another perspective on that historical moment. Your father is depicted as the kneeling man in the photograph taken on the day Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. Before becoming a writer and embarking on this book, what were you doing at the time?
Yes, so I went to law school and practiced law ultimately for 7 years. And that was the career that I had chosen. And I really thought that's what I would be doing for life. So growing up in Memphis, Tennessee, I kind of always had this idea that once I graduated from high school, I was going to leave not only Memphis, but I was going to leave the South and go, somewhere, a big city. That was sort of my game plan. And I did that. And I went to undergrad in the Chicagoland area and then went to DC for law school and just thought, okay, this is my plan. This is my path. I'm following that path. I thought I would spend the rest of my life being a DC lawyer in some capacity.
Did thoughts about your future move you enough to dig into your family history?
Yes. And I would say those thoughts were really about not my own future, but the future of my children and the future of our family and the legacy that we were carrying forward. And quite simply, I did not know what that legacy was. So at the time I decided that I had to go back and find the story, I was an attorney, not in DC, but in Texas. So that was sort of the first big step off the path that I had so carefully planned for myself. So I ended up meeting my future husband in Washington, DC, another DC lawyer. He got recruited to a company in Houston. And so we went down there, which again, my whole idea of I'm leaving the South, I ended up farther south than I'd ever lived in my entire life. And so went to a law firm, ultimately down there, passed the Texas bar, practiced law. And then I had children. And it was with the birth of my second child, I now have three, but with the middle one, where I really started thinking about legacy and our family story. And in particular, my father, who obviously, their grandfather, and how he had this huge story and this huge history that I knew little to nothing about, but that happened to be also a missing puzzle piece of American history. And that had to do with his presence at the assassination of Dr. King. And this was something that had never really been discussed in our family. And it was actually something that I had been running from, and making all these plans. Really, I was running away from some things that I needed to deal with in Memphis. I needed to now understand that past in order to give my children what they deserved, which was an understanding of our own family history, American and world history.
Thank you for that answer. It made me think about how important it is to understand our history within our families, but also as a society and world and community and country, because oftentimes history repeats itself in lots of ways. And I recognized that when I was reading your book. How did the world you were living in at that time, socially, personally, and politically, inspire you to write and inform the way you approach the story?
The world around me was sort of like today, although, of course, now, we're in this great, not great in the sense of wonderful, but great in the sense of huge inflection point in history and in politics and so forth. As a Black woman living in this society, there are always things happening that feel like cycling back to the past in certain ways, and just experiences that I had in my day-to-day life that always kept me thinking about systems of oppression, the perpetuation of these sorts of historical violences, if you will. And so I think that when I began to delve into my father's story, bound up with that were these thoughts about my own story and the ways in which my experiences echoed my father's, and the ways in which the times when he lived and continues to live, but the ways in which that history was being repeated and felt very present today. So it was all bound up together.
Years later, your father returns to the station where he first worked. There are more Black police officers, but not many. Systems remained, there's a ceiling, and there's a veneer, true equality, not full equality. How do we recognize that veneer today?
Well, I was just going to say, right. It's sort of like the more things change, the more they stay the same. And, you realize that we're dealing with the same fundamental problem, just dressed up in different period costumes.
The star is in your present position. It makes me think your story's not finished yet. And I wonder, how do you imagine it living beyond the page, if at all?
I see the story living on in readers and people who engage with the story and hopefully ask themselves as they're going through this narrative, who am I in relation to the institutions that I navigate? Because we all are navigating institutions that we may take issue with in terms of the things that this institution may be doing. And so how do we maintain our integrity and our values and yet push for change from within systems, outside of systems, although we must know that there's a price to be paid for that. I hope that as people read the story, they're thinking of all these things and not just looking at this as a story that happened to a man one time, a long time ago, but that it is an ongoing story, that we are a part of this story, and that history is always now. So, what will be our role?
What do you believe our role is, and can we uphold structures while also working to change them? Have you been able to figure that out?
If I figured that out, then, I don't know, that would be amazing. I'd probably be sitting on top of a mountain somewhere and people would be coming to get the answer. I have not even, come close to figuring that out. I feel like that's one of the great questions that every age must deal with, every people who around the world and throughout history are trying to get free, and we see this worldwide. In some cases we can't. It just depends on your position. All Each one of us has a different opportunity to make change, and for some people that does mean stepping out of these systems in which the world operates. Sometimes that does mean addressing these systemic issues in ways that put us in conflict with the law. But for others, perhaps it does mean being within those systems and steering them a different way, or being obstructive to things that cause harm. And so I don't think there's a simple answer. I think it depends on each person, where they are and what they can do. And certainly in a time such as this, it's an all hands on deck situation. So I would think that wherever one is, there's something that can be done. And it's just a question of doing it and not getting frozen by the question of how do I do this best. It's just don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Do the good that you can where you are.
As you know, there have been recent protests, and I was speaking with some friends about it. There was mixed consensus on variations on how everyone would participate. And you're absolutely right. It doesn't look the same for everyone. Others might participate through writing or through illustration or through conversations with friends or active protest, or sometimes being within the system and trying to change it, or being with the system and just being a voice of peace and non-hostility sometimes is enough too. I appreciate that answer because I think it's important to realize we do what we can, and the reality is we do need to survive. Something that I've been telling friends for the past few years is that I almost feel like protests are not as effective this day and age because we're missing a leader like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that there's not as much organization. I don't know if you have any thoughts on recent protests, and maybe do you think they're making an impact? How do you think they can be improved? And this is just a very general, not specific to any cause, but just protests in general.
Yes, absolutely, because protest is a big part of the story, with my father being there and in pretty much every instance agreeing with the protesters. And yet, there is law enforcement observing, on behalf of law enforcement to maintain order. And so there is a conflict there. But certainly today, we are seeing the same kinds of social action and protest that characterized the 1960s, particularly the late 60s, when my father was a police officer. And I think that what a lot of people miss maybe about the 60s, because we have all the footage, we have the photographs, and we see people marching in the street and carrying signs. I think some people are under the sort of misapprehension that's what it was. It was just a matter of walking with a sign in the street, maybe blocking some traffic, making noise. And certainly that was a part of it. But behind all of that, and this is what Dr. King was, this was part of his genius, and that of his cohorts, is they were organizers. They were organizers first. And so it wasn't just being visible, it was figuring out ways to make themselves heard. They were seen, but they were also heard, and they were very organized, and they were heard not just with what they were saying in the street, but with their dollars, with their bodies. For example, I think about the boycotts that were organized and how powerful that was, because people actually changed their behaviors and they changed the ways in which they engaged with these institutions that were oppressing them. And it was very effective. Now, also, the visibility was very effective as well. And that was part of the reason why Dr. King came to Memphis in 1968 to help with the sanitation strike that was going on at the time, was because he brought that visibility. But there was much more to it than that. And so today, of course, we see very visibly protests in the street, but I do think that there seems to be growing organization behind that. And there always has been organization that's less visible, but I think that where there is organization and grassroots work underneath, that's where you see the power, and that's where you see change being made. And so then it just takes that consistency and application of that kind of force. And I feel like I'm seeing it. I think we're all seeing that there is good coming from that, and that there is change coming from that slowly, because none of this happens quickly. It never has. But I feel that with some of the demonstrations that we've seen, which again are more than just, being out there in the street, but the discourse seems to be changing. I think that and by the way, it's not just even the action in the streets, but there are folks in the courts who are winning. I mean, have been winning, it seems, since things really started getting kind of more bonkers than usual. Folks have been going to court and winning pretty much every day, and those are quieter victories. They're not as necessarily photogenic, Instagrammable, but folks are winning in the courts. People are voting with their dollars when it comes to businesses whose practices they don't agree with. And I think we're seeing the results of that as well. So I do feel encouraged by that. And I just think it's just a matter of keeping it up.
I think you're absolutely right. There is, I mean, and the reality is justice and advocacy and civil rights is a slow process. Thank you for that. How do you see your work and your story, but not just your book, your public speaking, your social media, all of it, and your articles you've written for New York Times and other media outlets. So, how do you see your work participating in that larger conversation?
Human connection. I want that to be the goal. I feel that that is what it's all about. And, in this world, we have people in all sorts of situations, politically, socially, personally, who are trying to get free. These efforts are all connected. It's our shared humanity that that really should be sort of acknowledged. If everyone moved in the world in a way that acknowledged that shared humanity and respected it, the world would change overnight. And so what I hope to do is really facilitate that. And in sharing my father's story and that history, I hope to make people reflect on themselves, as I mentioned earlier, what they do, and really to recognize that ultimately we are all trying to get free, and we can all help each other do that. And through community, through connection, we can all have that. I think everything that matters in this life depends on community, whether you're talking about freedom, dignity, even life itself. And so we have to recognize that connectedness in order for any of us to have these things. And so I want to be a part of that in any way I can, whether it's through writing, speaking, social engagement, work in the community, anything I can do.
I think one of the things we forget sometimes, and it's very apparent when you look at social media and you'll read comments where people are just arguing and fighting with each other, because there's kind of this forgetfulness that there's a person on the other end of that comment or on the other end of that screen. And it speaks to this kind of idea where if we all saw the humanity in each other and the realization that we're kind of all here living, having similar hardships, trying to find similar things, and trying just to enjoy our lives the best way possible, that if that thoughtfulness and that idea were spread and recognized and owned, that maybe there would be more equality and respectfulness, and that we'd advance and evolve a lot further. If we go back to the spread, we see the Six of Swords. And so I wonder, what personal transitions have shaped you the most in your life and in your creative journey?
So many transitions. I mean, there are a few key ones. The first would be, as a child, my parents divorcing and moving with my mom and my brother from Northern Virginia to Memphis, and going from one situation to another one that was very different in the best way. I mean, I had a wonderful childhood, but I remember that. I remember that change, and I remember just a sense of this idea that there were multiple worlds within this world. You know, I thought life was one way, and then we take a not the longest plane ride in the world, and it's a whole different environment and social situation and family situation. So I think it was an early exposure to this idea that everything isn't just one way. There are multiple ways of being, and there are different places where things are different. So I had that idea from an early age, and that by being open to these changes, I would be able to experience a multiplicity of things. And I think that was an important concept for a child to have. And so growing up, I had an idea that I didn't have to stay in Memphis if I didn't want to, that the world was bigger than that. And that if I wanted to experience something different, I could just go. I had the freedom to do that. And I would say the next big change would probably be from practicing law to staying home with my kids, because I had always been so driven by goals, personal goals. And suddenly I had a different concept of what those goals could be. That those goals could be not necessarily career goals, but more of the type of person I wanted to be, um, the the legacy that I would be passing on. So it gave me kind of an expanded sense. Not that I couldn't also have career goals, but it just expanded that sense of what looked like. And then I would say the third big transition was becoming a writer, which involved, and it's kind of a long story, but essentially getting stranded in Tahoe with my kids while my husband was working overseas. So we were on different continents, and unexpectedly, I had to stay in Tahoe in this house that was supposed to be a vacation house, and it became sort of our full-time home with the kids while my husband continued to work at his job in Nigeria, which at the time was in the Ebola pandemic. And so for that reason, we had to be separate. And that was a big shock. It felt like a wilderness period. Suddenly, I'm in this new place, which was kind of like that first big shift in my life where I'm going from one scenario to another that's completely different, and having to find my way, find my footing, and then finding myself alone again and having to sit with this story that I had been running from. And even when I thought, oh, I can face this, ultimately I continued to run. And suddenly I was being sat down by the universe, if you will. And so that is where I began to write. And that is why there is a Kneeling Man book, and why I have a writing career. Had I not been sat down, I don't know how I would have actually gotten around to writing the book. Maybe, something else maybe would have happened, but this was how it happened.
What did you once carry with you that you've been able to leave behind because of all this?
I've left that sense of dread of the unknown and that discomfort with mystery, I guess I would say. I realized that when you focus on something bigger than yourself, then, I mean, maybe it's not so much that you don't experience fear, but that it becomes secondary. And so I was able to leave that behind, or at least to the side, and pursue what mattered most, which was truth and connection. Finding out as best I could what happened and being able to connect with that history, connect with my father, plug in that puzzle piece of history, and connect other people to that story so that they could kind of take that with them and apply it to their lives.
Your relationship with your father is completely transformed. Can you speak a little bit to what it was and how it is now? And then also, in what ways did writing this book affect your father?
Well, what it was before, because there were giant things in his past, huge parts of his life that happened to pertain to history that I did not know, it was really difficult to relate to him in as close a way as I would have liked as a daughter. And so I think, even on a subconscious level, it felt like I was dancing around those silences. And so we had a very good relationship, but perhaps it was a bit formal on my part. And again, there was that fear that was sort of sitting somewhere, like crouched down in my mind. And so I think that did govern the ways in which I interacted with him. But once we began to go through this story, which required, well, he started off with, this big document that he sent me of his notes, 17 pages of notes. And then I had to read and digest those, which, I mean, that was a 5-year process, because I started reading and I immediately felt overwhelmed. But then I was sat down by the universe and I read those notes. And then that started a conversation. We met in person to talk about them and expanded on what he had written down, and we we started a dialogue that lasted 4 years. I mean, I started writing this book in 2015 and started interviewing him that same year. And those interviews carried on a consistent basis through, I would say, at least 2021, maybe 2022. That might have been our last interview. And so in that, we really got to know each other. And it was a two-way street. I think that during our conversations, my father got to know me better as well. And so it really did impact his life. And he's told me this, that he had never shared most of this stuff with anyone in the world. And certainly not my mother, who said that she was surprised by 75% of what she read. She did not know a lot of the information that was in the book. But he really had kept all this stuff to himself for decades. What a burden to carry. And so through our conversations, he was able to let that go, to release that burden, to set it down. And he told me that he believes that this process has lengthened his life, and he is still with us. He's going to be 82 in May. And so and very healthy, and he attributes a lot of his health and vigor to this process of unburdening.
I think there's a lot of discussion right now about intergenerational trauma. Each family carries a lot of silence sometimes around things that they don't want to to unravel, and I just applaud you for doing that in your family.
Thank you. Thank you. That really means a lot to hear. And I hope that other people can take that and perhaps do the same in their own families, because we all have something. We all have these stories.
My last and final question for you, a new Reading Marginalia closing tradition, is what has been your unspoken truth? Something we'd see in the margins in red ink in your notes, not something the public would see.
I would say ideas that we hold on to that maybe keep us from doing what we should do. It's the idea of letting go of expectations, letting go of perfection. I think that would be where my unspoken truths lie. That in order to really live the life that I'm called to live, it requires many kinds of letting go.
Leta, I'm so grateful for you, for your time, for your story, for the work that you do that contributes to more community and more connection. If anyone listening would like to find out more about you and purchase a copy of your book, The Kneeling Man, where should they go?
They should go to letaseletsky.com. I'll spell that. It's LetaSeletzky.com. Also, I'm on social media. I am on Threads at la_Seletsky. I'm on Instagram under the same handle, and I'm on Blue Sky as well. And I think I'm Leta Seletsky. If you just put my name in there, you'll find me. So I spend a lot of time on socials as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leta. I appreciate you and your time, and I hope that we continue to make progress.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
That's a wrap. It's our very first podcast. I am so grateful for everyone that has watched and listened. Thank you for joining us here at Red Ink Marginalia. Thank you to our fabulous guest, Leta McCollough Seletsky. Please be sure to go follow her on all her socials. I'll share it all over the sites. And purchase a copy of her book, The Kneeling Man. Next week, we have a special interview with the Las Vegas interdisciplinary artist and muralist, Mila May. Some super cool work there and a fun discussion about perfectionism and the inner critic that artists sometimes have. So be sure to check it out. That drops February 21st, 2026. Again, thank you so much. Please remember, like, comment, subscribe, share, help us grow, and we'll see you next time.